Namaste. Welcome to my podcast. So, I had recorded a podcast with Shrikant Talagiri a couple of months ago where we had covered the subject of the Aryan Invasion Theory. But even though I had covered that subject, I personally felt there was a lot more that needs to be spoken about this subject. There were many aspects of this issue that we simply did not touch. In the middle of all of this, there was an article that had come in the paper, The Hindu, written by Tony Joseph, that was in favor of the Aryan Invasion Theory, and it created quite a stir online. Post that article, a rebuttal to that article of The Hindu came up on the website India Facts, which was written by Abhijit Chavda. And I thought that this would be a good opportunity to actually have a detailed discussion about this subject once again. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Abhijit Chavda on the podcast. Hi Abhijit, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Thanks for agreeing to do this. So Abhijit, before we get on to the subject at hand, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Certainly. So, my name is Abhijit Chavda, and I am a theoretical physicist. So, I'm not sure if many people know what that is. So, theoretical physics is a branch of physics that employs mathematical models and abstractions of physical objects and systems to rationalize, explain, and predict natural phenomena. This is in contrast to experimental physics, which uses experimental tools to probe these phenomena. So, my field of research is physical cosmology and astrophysics, and my research interests include black hole physics, the physics of the very early universe, the intersection of quantum physics and gravitation, and in particular, the nature of dark matter and dark energy, which make up approximately 95% of the total mass energy of the universe. So I've been fascinated with by science since I was a boy: physics, chemistry, biology, anatomy, medicine, all of that. And the other thing that always fascinated me was ancient history. And I was fortunate to have access to a series of books called The Story of Civilization by Will Durant as a boy. It is like, I think it's 11 volumes in all. And I discovered history by reading these books. It was fascinating. I found it more interesting than most storybooks and novels. So that's how I discovered ancient history about Rome, Egypt, Greece, etc. But the coverage of India was kind of inadequate and a little depressing in these books, to be honest. So that's how I discovered history, and that's how I developed this interest in the origins of the Indian people. Like the question is that who are the Indian people and where do they come from? What is their origin? So this is what I've been researching kind of on and off for the past several years, and that's what brings us to the topic at hand. So that's a brief intro about myself.
Okay, so Abhijit, so the first, I want to ask you two questions and then you can give me, a detailed answer to that. So to begin with, I would like you to give a brief overview of the development of the Aryan invasion theory itself. What was the historical background? What led these guys to actually come up with this theory? And why is this theory such a big controversy? So please go ahead.
Okay, so the Aryan invasion theory, the historical aspect of it is that it was developed during the British occupation of India. Uh, there was a guy called I think his name was Wheeler. I'm not sure. So there was a person who the British appointed to learn Sanskrit and investigate the dealings of Indian temples and all that. So Indian temples, their records are usually written in Sanskrit. So they had to learn Sanskrit to do this. And when this person he learned Sanskrit, he realized that Sanskrit grammar and Sanskrit vocabulary and all that, it's strikingly similar to many European languages, such as Greek, Latin, Celtic, German, Slavic, etc. So he noticed this, and he also noticed that it is similar to Persian. So that's where people first realized that there is a connection between the people of India and their languages and the people of the West, especially Europe and also Persia. So that's how the linguistic connection was made. And then later people like Max Muller and all, who studied India from their perspective, they started developing this theory. And what they postulated was that India's original inhabitants were Dravidians, the dark-skinned people, supposedly. And these people, they built a highly developed civilization, which was later found in the 1920s approximately, which is known as the so-called Indus Valley civilization or the Harappan civilization. And the other aspect of this theory is that India was invaded and conquered from the west by a nomadic people, supposedly, which these people call the Indo-Aryans. They called them the Aryans initially, and now they are known as the Indo-Aryans. So they postulated that these people invaded India around 1500 BCE, and they were of European origin, white-skinned people, and they must have spoken Vedic Sanskrit, is what these people believed. And these Indo-Aryans are believed to have destroyed the indigenous Dravidian civilization and subjugated the natives and imposed Sanskrit language and the Indo-Aryan culture on the entire native population of India. And then these Aryans supposedly composed the Vedas after invading India and imposed the caste system on the Dravidians and the other indigenous peoples of India, like the tribals and all that. So this is essentially what the Aryan invasion theory is and how it was developed. And there is also a counter theory to the Aryan invasion theory, which is the out of India theory, which is proposed by many people later. So according to this out of India theory, the Indo-Aryan people and their languages, they are supposed to have originated in the Indian subcontinent. So they are indigenous to India. And the Indus Valley civilization, according to this other counter theory, is that this Indus Valley civilization is the actual original Vedic civilization, not a Dravidian civilization, as claimed by the Aryan invasion theory people. So proponents of the out of India theory, they cite archaeological evidence of civilizational and cultural continuity and Indian literary sources like Puranas, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, which contain extensive genealogies of kings that date back thousands of years, which are dismissed by these scholars as by the mainstream scholars today as mythology. So that's a brief outline of the development of the Aryan invasion theory and the counter theory, and it's become a very big controversy in the past several decades.
Okay, now, so as you know, I had even sent you a link for the podcast with Talagiri. So in Shrikant Talagiri's podcast, obviously we covered the linguistic aspect of Aryan invasion. So now what I was thinking was, would you be able to give us, the other aspects of the Aryan invasion theory? So when I say the other aspects, I mean the genetic evidence, the archaeological evidence, the literary evidence, and I don't like the use of the word mythological, but the mythological evidence. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of archaeological evidence right here in India, first of all. The archaeological evidence basically is the pre-Vedic evidence in the Indus Valley civilization region. So that is around the rivers Saraswati and Indus. The Saraswati obviously is no longer there, and lots of people have doubted the fact that it even existed. But recent evidence has proven that the Saraswati did exist, and there is a ancient dry paleo channel of the river which is there in a large part of India and also in Pakistan. So the archaeological evidence around the Saraswati is that there are hundreds of sites around these rivers, the Indus and the Saraswati. We know about a couple of cities, right? Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. These are very large metropolitan areas that existed like 4, 5, nearly 6,000 years ago. But there also exist lots of other cities that are not known at all. They are very badly known. Like if you look at there's a place called Rakhighari in Haryana, which is actually larger in area and size than the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. So these places, if you go there, you find lots of ancient artifacts like clay objects and all those things, figurines of people, figurines of human beings, and all those things. So these things actually they demonstrate the cultural continuity of Indian civilization. For example, if you there are these female figurines that they have found in a site in Baluchistan. I forgot the name of the site, but they have found female figurines with vermilion at the parting of the hair. We can still see the color at the parting of the hair, which is exactly what people continue to do today. Married ladies, they wear sindoor in their hair. So this is an evidence of continuity of civilization right from Harappan times. And there are other examples, like you have evidence of the Shivalinga and Yoni. You have evidence of yogic poses. There are statuettes that demonstrate yogic poses. So it shows that yoga has come from such a long time ago, and it was there in Harappa. It is still there today. Then the folk tale of the thirsty crow, then spiraled bangles that women wear in Haryana and Rajasthan. So all this evidence exists, statuettes and figurines of people with all these things. So you can see cultural continuity from this archaeological evidence in Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. And if you look at the dating of these sites, these sites are extraordinarily old. Some of these sites, they have been found to be 8,000 years old, 9,500 years old. And I have absolutely no doubt that there are many sites which are even older, and they have not yet been discovered. I mean, there are hundreds of sites that are known to exist, around 500 sites. 500 sites are known to exist. And I'm sure that if you look, and if archaeologists actually investigate these places, you will find at least 500 more. So I am sure that I myself have no doubt that you can find sites which are more than 10,000 years old also over here. So that is a little bit of archaeology in the Harappan area. Now there is other archaeology also. I mean, if you look at if you look at the area around Anatolia, which is in modern Turkey, so over there they have found evidence of an Aryan substrate, superstrate. I mean, that place was ruled by the Mitanni people, the kingdom of Mitanni, which is located in present-day Syria and Anatolia. So this kingdom had an Indo-Aryan Sanskrit-speaking ruling class. And how do you know that? So we have found a horse training manual, which is a clay tablet inscribed in the ancient script of that region. And that manual is in the Hittite language, but it contains some terminology from Vedic Sanskrit. And this is because it is believed that the person who wrote this manual, his name was Kikuli, so he probably did not know enough of that language to write technical terms. That's why he used Vedic Sanskrit terms in this clay tablet. So this gives us evidence of the existence of Indo-Aryans, of Sanskrit-speaking people out there in Anatolia, which is several thousand kilometers away from India in the west. And these clay tablets have been dated to around 1,500 or approximately BCE. So that is another piece of archaeological evidence which we find far away from India. So that shows that there is a possibility that Indo-Aryans may have migrated westwards from India. And later on, I will bring out the reason why it is possible that it is more probable that they went westwards than the other way around, that they invaded India from the west. So that is a little bit of the archaeological evidence. Now we have linguistic evidence, which is very well known, that which was brought out in your interview with Shrikant Talagiri, that many of these, basically all the Indo-European languages, they probably descended from one common language, which seems to be Vedic Sanskrit or pre-Vedic Sanskrit, from whatever evidence we have right now. So that is the linguistic evidence. Then you have literary evidence as well. Like, for example, if you look at the Rig Veda, then the Rig Veda talks about the Saraswati, and there is a lot of mention of the river Saraswati in the Rig Veda. And this river is not mentioned as a river which is in decline, but as a river which is in its prime. For example, it calls the Saraswati the greatest of rivers. It calls it glorious, loudly roaring, and mother of floods. So evidently, this clearly references a mighty river in its prime, not one in decline. And according to the Aryan Invasion Theory, the Aryans invaded India around 1500 BCE, and which is known to be the time when the Saraswati dried up mostly. And if they came to India at that time and then wrote the Rig Veda after that, then how can the Rig Veda contain evidence of and references to a glorious river, which is the mother of floods, which is clearly a river in its prime, a mighty river? So this actually causes a lot of doubt about the Aryan Invasion Theory. And apart from that, there is more evidence, literary evidence in ancient Vedic texts. So, for example, consider the Bodhayana Shrota Sutra, which is an ancient Vedic text. So, one of the parts of this text refers to a migration of an ancient Indian king, a Vedic king, westward. The king's name was Amavasu, and the text refers to Amavasu migrating to the west. And it says that his people are the Gandhara people, the Parshu people, and the Aratha people. So the Gandhara people, we know very well where Gandhara is, right? Gandhara is the ancient Afghanistan. It was the Afghanistan who used to be part of the Indian civilization. It no longer is, but it was at that time. And Gandhara is where you have Kandahar and all those places today. So Amavasu's people, one of them are the Gandhara, the other are the Parshu, and the third are the Aratha. Now the Parshu are obviously the Persian people of Persia. And the Aratha are tentatively identified as the people who are living in the vicinity of Mount Ararat in eastern Anatolia. So that gives us a very interesting very interesting piece of of literary evidence that Indians may have migrated westward. I mean, this portion of the Bodhayana Shrota Sutra has been misinterpreted and mistranslated by people like Rumila Thapar, and they have interpreted it to mean that Amavasu actually migrated eastward, which is wrong, and it has been proved to be wrong. So this is literary evidence, and when I talk about the third people, the Aratha people. Now you see, today if you go to Armenia, there's a mountain there which is called Mount Ararat, and the traditional Armenian name for this mountain is Masis, and it is named after a legendary Armenian king called Amasya. Now this name Amasya is clearly linguistically related to the name Amavasu of the ancient Indian king, who is recorded in this Vedic text. So this is clear literary evidence that ancient Indians must have migrated to the west. But unfortunately, our eminent historians and scholars, they dismiss all ancient Indian texts as mythology. And that's why there's been a big controversy.
I would just like to add one thing over here for the listeners that he's Abhijit has made a few very distinct claims about there are figurines and statues, and he's also spoken about the Hittite king and the Mitanni kings, and so there are actual pictures of the seals, and there are actual pictures of the what you call the photo of the female with the vermilion on, the sindoor on. And if you guys are interested in taking this even further, you guys should actually buy a book by B.B. Lal. It's a very small book of 140 pages, and he's actually documented all these photos over there. Am I correct, Abhijit?
I know about a book called The Rigvedic People by B.B. Lal. I'm not sure exactly how long it is, but yes, he has documented all these images and everything very well in this book. And he has made a very good archaeological case, based on archaeological evidence for the continuity of Indian civilization. And basically, he demonstrates and he refutes the Aryan Invasion Theory. He demonstrates that it is wrong.
Yeah, it's a very interesting book. Now, Abhijit, I want to move on to the next part, which I believe is the crux of this podcast. I want to talk about genetics. Now, before you explain the whole, issue of genetics, first of all, because see, a lot of the listeners may not even understand what a haplogroup is actually.
Yes.
So I would like you, so to begin with, I would like you to explain first what is a haplogroup, and then what is the Indo-Aryan and what is the Indo-European haplogroups, and then you can explain what are the research papers. I believe there are some research papers that are pro-Aryan invasion, there are some research papers that are anti-Aryan invasion. So can you take it from the basic, and then we can get into the details?
Yeah, certainly. So the science of DNA profiling, it first developed in the 1980s. So DNA profiling, basically what it does is that it takes a sample of genetic material from a person, a human being, and it analyzes its DNA. Now DNA is a complex molecule. It's a very large molecule, which is about, if you unravel it, it's about 3 meters in length. And most human cells contain this DNA. Now, DNA is packed into chromosomes. Now, there are about 23 pairs of chromosomes in humans in every cell. So there are total 46 chromosomes. And 22 of these pairs, they look the same. They are called autosomes. And the 23rd pair are the sex chromosomes. They differ between males and females. So females have 2 copies of what's known as the X chromosome, and males have 1 X chromosome and 1 Y chromosome. So there is a little bit of genetic difference between males and females, only in the way the chromosomes are placed in the body. Now, in genetic terminology, a haplogroup is a group of individuals that share a common ancestor with a particular genetic mutation. So a genetic mutation is something that can happen by chance. It usually happens by chance. A genetic mutation is a change in the genetic makeup of the person, which means a change in the DNA. Now, mutations can happen all over the DNA, but the mutations that we are talking about are either those that happen in the Y chromosome or in the X chromosome. So a haplogroup is essentially a lineage. It is a single line of descent, which typically dates back several thousand years. In India, we call it a vansh, right? A vansh is a lineage. It's a line of descent. So, in other words, a haplogroup is a large extended family or clan, all of whose members have a shared ancestry. They all descend from one single individual in whom this mutation originally happened. So there are 2 types of haplogroups: Y chromosome haplogroups, which are patrilineal haplogroups, and mitochondrial DNA haplogroups, which are matrilineal haplogroups. So the patrilineal haplogroups that their genetics are passed on from father to son, and for the matrilineal haplogroups, the genetics are passed on from mother to daughter. And haplogroups are identified by letters of the alphabet like A, B, C, D, etc. And subgroups of a parent haplogroup are identified by letters and numbers like A1, A1A, A1B, etc. So now we come to so I hope that explains what a haplogroup is. It is a lineage, basically. It's a line of descent.
Yeah.
Okay, so now there is a particular haplogroup called the R1A or R1 star haplogroup. A star basically means everything after that. So this particular haplogroup is closely associated with the spread of Indo-European languages throughout Eurasia. So wherever you have speakers who speak one of the Indo-European languages, you find this haplogroup in those populations today. So that haplogroup basically there is evidence, and there's been a lot of research done in the past 10 years. Okay, before I speak about that, so there are interrelated fields in genetics like population genetics, genomics, genotyping, comparative genetics, archaeogenetics, etc. So these fields have emerged recently. I mean, genetics is a very new field. It first developed in the 1980s with a degree of precision. So these fields are now developing very rapidly, and this has happened since the dawn of the 21st century. That's when people first developed the tools to determine with precision what haplogroups are and other things like that. So these fields are evolving very rapidly, and they are giving us new tools and new ways of precisely determining people's familial relationships and ancestral relationships, patterns of migration, and many other things. So it's a very, very precise toolbox, and the precision will only increase. It will only improve the next 10, 20 years. So I believe that genetics is still in its infancy, but in the next 10, 20 years, you will have really, really precise measurements coming out, and I believe that is actually what's going to clinch this entire debate about the origin of the Indo-Aryan people. So now coming back to this haplogroup called R1A. So there are papers which have been published for the past 10, 12 years, which demonstrate that R1A and in particular a subset of R1A, which is called R1A1A, and this haplogroup, it seems to have originated in India itself. So now, if you look at the various populations that have that belong to this haplogroup, which means that they are part of this extended family, then you will see large concentrations in India, and you will see large concentrations in Eastern Europe, and in the Asiatic portion of Russia, etc. So the total number of people who belong to this group, to this haplogroup, are nearly 1 billion in number. So essentially, this is the most successful extended family of all time in human history. And it seems to have originated in ancient India. So there is a research paper from 2006, which is by, I think, Sengupta and his colleagues. And this research paper, it demonstrates the absence of any significant outside genetic influence in India for the past 10 to 15,000 years. So that kind of pours cold water over the Aryan invasion theory right there. So this paper is from 2006. Now there is another paper from, I think it was around 2010 by Underhill and his group. So this paper from 2010, it proves that there is no significant patrilineal gene flow from Europe and Central Asia into India, at least since the middle of the Holocene period, which is about 7,000 to 5,000 years ago. And there's after that, there's been another research paper by Tamang and Thangaraj, two Indian authors. So this paper it's from around 2012. So this paper rejects the possibility of an Aryan invasion, and it basically concludes that Indian populations are genetically unique and harbor the second highest genetic diversity after the populations of Africa. Now we know that Africa is a place where the human species originated. At least Homo sapiens originated in Africa. About very recent research shows that it's around 300,000 years ago. So we know that the history of our species is the history of migrations, and we know that we all came out of Africa. So naturally, Africa will have extremely high genetic diversity because it's the home of our species. So after Africa, the second highest human genetic diversity is in India, which tells a lot. It means that humans have been living in India for a very, very long time. And
that's fascinating.
That's right, yeah. And then there's another research paper, I believe it's by Sharma and his group, which demonstrates that the R1A star or R1A1 star haplogroup, which is found everywhere in Eurasia, it originated in India. And the most recent paper is by a French gentleman called Ducot. It's from 2015. So this paper basically it samples a very large population of samples, about more than 6,000 samples, and it confirms the results of all these previous papers over the past 10-12 years, and it concludes that the oldest examples of the haplogroup R1A are found in India, in the Indian subcontinent, and are approximately 15,000 to 16,000 years old. So if you look at all these papers together as a whole, what we can reliably say is that the R1A haplogroup originated in India itself, and it also tells you that the Indo-Aryan people have lived in the Indian subcontinent for at least 15 to 18,000 years, which completely invalidates the theory that the Indo-Aryans invaded India about 3,500 years ago. And it also shows.
Okay.
Yeah, one more thing. It also.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, it also shows that the hundreds of millions of people of the R1A family living across the world today, which is a very large fraction of humanity, they are all descended from one single male ancestor who lived in India about 15 to 18,000 years ago. So that's a very momentous discovery.
Yeah, it is huge. Now I want to connect this to the article written by whatever, I keep forgetting that guy's name, Tony Joseph,
yes.
Yeah, Tony Joseph. Now, he also cites some study in his article, and in your, not this article, the one before this that you had written in India Facts. I believe you've written 2 articles on this subject. The first one was even more detailed than the second one.
Yes.
Now, in that article and in Tony Joseph's article, there are some studies which support the Aryan invasion theory. So can you tell the listeners a bit about them and why you believe they are actually inaccurate?
Certainly, yes. So yeah, in the first article, the detailed one which I wrote, I have stated that there are several studies, genetic studies, which claim that the Aryan invasion theory is indeed correct. These articles claim to demonstrate that people from the Eurasian steppes, which is Central Asia and Eastern Europe, that these people, they invaded India about around 2,500 years, around 2,500 BC, and settled down. They either migrated or invaded, whatever they want to call it. So there are studies like this which claim to settle the issue. But the thing the reason why they are wrong is that none of these papers they are able to disprove the results of the papers which I cited just a while ago. All those papers which demonstrate that the R1A haplogroup originated in India, and that this origin happened 15 to 18,000 years ago. This is conclusive proof that these people have given. And none of these papers which claim to prove the Aryan invasion theory, none of these papers is able to give an alternative location where R1A may have originated. And these papers, they also don't give a time frame for the origin of R1A. So essentially, these papers which claim to prove that Aryans came from outside, they don't address this issue at all. They sidestep it. They don't address the issue of the origin of the R1A haplogroup and the age of the haplogroup, or the time to the most common recent ancestor. So this very important issue is not addressed in any of these papers. And as long as nobody else can prove, as long as no one else, there is no other competing result for this, then those papers, their evidence doesn't really matter. It doesn't really count. Because the clinching evidence is the origin and the age of the R1A haplogroup, which is very conclusively demonstrated by several papers to be in India and at least 15 to 18,000 years old. So that's why these papers, they don't really matter. I mean, they are wrong because they don't provide an alternative model of the origin of R1A. So that's the gist of the entire thing.
Okay, now I want to address a particular part of my podcast with Srikant Talagiri. Obviously, you've heard the podcast where, when I asked him about the genetic issue, and he, in a way, he was. I wouldn't use the word he dismissed it, but he has never taken the whole genetic issue seriously. So obviously you've heard his views. So what are your views on his views, and why do you think genetics matter? And also, what is the way forward? I mean, how will we settle this case once and for all? So what do you think would be the absolute clinching evidence that would say, no, the out of India theory is right?
Right. So, yes, I've heard your podcast with Mr. Talagiri, and I would like to respectfully disagree with his conclusions that genetics don't matter. So the reason for that is that genetics is nearly an exact science. Linguistics is a subset of sociology, anthropology, all that, and I mean, it is not an exact science. There are diverging views. Even today, there is a lot of controversy about many of the language families. Like there is a claim that that there should be a Greco-Aryan language family, which is a subset of Indo-European. So that is a big controversy. There are lots of people who are pro this and lots of people who are against this, and there is no clear way to resolve this except by consensus. On the other hand, in genetics, you don't need consensus. You just need evidence, clear evidence. It's clear cut. And genetics gives you very, very precise evidence. Like, for example, if you were to do a DNA test, paternity test, for example, it gives you evidence whether a certain child is the offspring of a certain father with and the kind of odds that you get is 1 in several million. So that's a very, very, very high degree of confidence with which you get the results. That's why genetics is a very precise science, and that's why I believe that genetics is going to be the clincher in the future, because genetics gives you not only what haplogroup a certain individual belongs to, it gives you how old that haplogroup is, and that too without analyzing ancient DNA. You can analyze my DNA, I'm living right now. You can analyze my DNA and you can get an idea of what haplogroup I belong to and how old that haplogroup is, which is a fantastic tool. You don't really need to go dig into do archaeological expeditions and find ancient DNA and hope that it's preserved well and then test it, etc. So genetics actually is closely related to linguistics. I mean, in linguistics also you have what's known as genetic relationships between languages. And these genetic relationships between languages closely parallel the genetic relationships between haplogroups and population groups. So there is a close correlation, but unfortunately, linguistics is not an exact science. It is still imprecise, unfortunately. So that's why genetics is going to be very important, and right now it's still evolving. Genetics is not the skill set, the tool set is still evolving. You're getting sharper tools in the box as we speak. So I believe in the next 20-30 years, you will have really, really precise tools which will be able to give us a very clear idea of the entire population genomics of the subcontinent of India. Now you ask me, what is the clincher? What's going to clinch and settle once and for all the entire question, the entire controversy about the origin of the Indo-Aryan people, of the Indian people? So that's going to be the genetic makeup of the people of the ancient Harappan civilization or the Sindhu Saraswati civilization. So we know that many skeletons have been found in many of these places that they have dug up.
Yeah.
Wherever you have done archaeological excavations, you have found ancient skeletons of people. So now if you analyze the DNA of those ancient specimens, then you will be able to determine what haplogroup those people belong to. And if the ancient R1a haplogroup, which everyone agrees belongs to the Indo-Aryan people, not to the so-called Dravidian people. So if this ancient haplogroup is found in those ancient specimens from before the date of the so-called Aryan invasion, that is going to clinch the entire story. It's going to give clinching evidence of the fact that the Aryan invasion theory is wrong. On the other hand, if you sample a large number of such specimens, and if you find many of them having other haplogroups, then it's going to prove the Aryan invasion theory up to a certain extent. So genetic evidence is going to be the clincher. So what needs to be done is that we need to do more archaeology and find more specimens. I mean, right now we have specimens, ancient skeletons, which are housed in museums and all that. But unfortunately, those skeletons have been handled by human hands. And when you handle a specimen, there's always the risk of DNA contamination, which means that the DNA of the person who's handling it may infiltrate into the genetic sample, into the ancient sample, the specimen. So those skeletons which are lying in museums today, they cannot be used for this purpose. So what needs to be done is that we need to do fresh excavations, and we need to find new specimens which have to be handled with a lot of care to ensure that there is no contamination. And then we need to sequence. I mean, we need to analyze the DNA of these ancient specimens. Hopefully, the DNA has not degraded over all these years. And we need to find lots of specimens. I mean, ideally, we need to have a large sample, 10, 20, 50, 100 maybe, so that we get a very good idea of the genetics of the ancient Harappan people. So that is going to basically clinch the entire thing. If you find R1a there, it's done. It means the Indo-Aryan people lived in the Harappan civilization, and that's going to conclusively disprove the Aryan invasion theory. So that is the clincher.
Interesting. I think there was some work going on in some university in Pune where they
Yes.
were kind of testing some samples, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I read it in several websites. In 2015, they found a batch of 3 or 4 skeletons in Haryana. So those skeletons were packed up and shipped off to South Korea, I believe, some university in South Korea, where the DNA sequencing was to be done. And the results were expected to be announced in 2016, but I have no idea what happened because there's been no news after that. So this entire project was being handled by a professor in the University of Pune. Yeah, so I don't know what happened. I mean, that's something that needs to be done on a priority basis.
Yeah, I don't know. For an issue that leads to so much fighting, I see nobody really interested in that aspect of it. I was kind of surprised myself.
Yeah.
So yeah. So now, just a sidestep, do you think this whole allergy to genetics could also be out of a fear that what if things go south?
It is possible, yes. Genetics is going to give a conclusive answer, one way or the other, this way or that. So either it's going to disprove the Aryan invasion theory conclusively, or it's going to prove that the Aryan invasion actually happened. But I'll tell you what, based on all the evidence that we have, I mean, see, genetics does not exist in a vacuum, right? Genetics is something that we have to take it together with all the other disciplines. We have to take it with the archaeological evidence. We have to take it along with the literary evidence, linguistic evidence, and all the other things put together. So we get a composite, large picture of the entire scene. It's like an ancient detective story, right? It's a mystery, and we are detectives trying to understand what happened using the clues and the evidence that we have at hand. So we don't just focus on one particular kind of clue. We focus on the entire thing as a whole. And if you see the things as a whole, then it's very clear in my mind, actually, at least, that we're going to see that R1A haplogroup it existed in the Harappan people. But yeah, you're right that some people may be afraid of what if we get this result, or what if we get that result. So that sort of thing is definitely there, but I don't really know because I'm not involved in that. But yeah, it's possible.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically, I think the best way to look at this is, I think, how in evolutionary biology or in basically in science, they say they create a nomenological network of evidence where you look at evidence through multiple areas. So one could be linguistics, one could be archaeology, one could be, literary evidences, one could be genetic. And when we have a consilience of sorts of all these different areas, and they point to pretty much one direction, and that could be the answer, right?
That's correct. I mean, what we are getting is a consistent pattern which points in one direction only. I mean, if you look at all the other evidence, if you set aside genetic evidence for a while, and if you look at all the other evidence, the archaeological evidence and the linguistic, literary, etc., all the evidence, it all points consistently in a certain direction. And that direction is not in the direction of the Aryan Invasion theory. It all points to the possibility that the Indo-Aryans actually came from India. They originated in India. So it's a consistent pattern. It's not a one-off thing. It happens again and again and again. Every time you see the evidence, it points in that direction. So it's clear that there is a consistent pattern. And genetics also is showing the same thing from whatever we have so far. I mean, all the reliable genetic evidence that we have. So that's right, yeah.
I like the comfort with which you are able to talk about both sides. I guess it's your training in science. So unfortunately, Twitter पे इतना लोग comfortable नहीं होते. उनको लगता है हाय तौबा हो जाएगी अगर कुछ और हो जाएगा. कुछ होने तो वाला है नहीं.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, scientific training essentially gives you the ability to understand results across various scientific disciplines. So even though I am a physicist, I understand the results of genetics. I may not be able to perform genetic experiments and research myself, but at least I can understand the results and interpret them. So that is one advantage that I have, and that's what I'm trying to put across in my articles so that people at large can understand what's happening.
No, I have to say this. I actually read your articles 2-3 times, so that I can get the whole picture. And I have to commend you that it was a breath of fresh air to read someone, who was showing what is the other side saying also. Because unfortunately, usually in our case, whether it's the right wing or left wing or whatever wing you want to call it in India, it's almost like living in ideological echo chambers where nobody wants to listen to the other side. Everybody wants to. So I actually have to commend you that your article was actually refreshing, and thanks a lot for doing this, Abhijit. I'm really grateful to you, and I hope to do this podcast once more with you when we have some more evidence coming.
Certainly. Thank you so much for the kind words. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Abhijit. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.